Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today we're going to be showing you how to install the REDARC Tow-Pro Liberty brake controller, and we're going to be doing that in conjunction with the etrailer.com universal brake controller install kit, as well as the REDARC adapter plug and the stoplight switch kit made by Roadmaster. But before we get into all that, why don't we just take a few minutes, check this out, and make sure it's going to be what you're looking for. People use these Jeeps to do a ton of different things, which does include pulling some trailers around. And if your trailer is equipped with trailer brakes, you're going to need a way to apply them and help slow everything down. That way, you're not relying just on your Jeep to do all of the stopping. And that's where a brake controller is going to come into play, like our REDARC here. And there's a ton of different brake controllers on the market. What makes the REDARC kind of shine or separate itself from a lot of the others is just the size of it and kind of how it's going to work, among other things, but this is the big one. So the only thing you're going to be able to see is this knob here, and this is how you control the brake controller and make your adjustments and do all those different types of things. So pretty cool. You know, compared to some of the other traditional style brake controllers that I like to call them, they're a little bit bulkier and take up some space. On a vehicle like the Jeep, I don't really think it's a huge deal. You know, just about any accessory you put on these kind of look right at home. But if you're looking for a really clean factory type look, this one it's hard to beat. Or maybe if you're a taller person and, you know, these Jeeps aren't huge in here, you don't have a ton of leg room, and you don't want to have to deal with the larger brake controller being mounted up down here in your way, this will be a good solution for you. Brake controller is going to be good for trailers that have 1 to 2 axles, which is perfect for a vehicle like the Jeep. Chances are pretty good you're not going to be pulling triple axle trailers around. And it's a pretty simple brake controller to work with. So you're going to have a knob or a dial here that's adjustable from 0 to 10. And what that's going to do is change your braking force. So 0 meaning you hit the brake in the Jeep and you won't get any power back to the trailer. 10 meaning it's going to be more forceful, right? And usually it's good to start somewhere in the middle, you know, 5, 4, something like that. If the trailer's not stopping how you want it, it's kind of pushing you around a little bit, you can always turn it up a number or 2 and go from there. If it's too aggressive or coming on too strong, you can dial it back a little bit. You know, it's really simple, and you kind of do this on the fly while you're going and find the sweet spot that you like, depending on the load of your trailer and hilly conditions and things like that, so you can kind of fine tune it. This is going to be a proportional style brake controller, which is what I usually recommend in almost every circumstance. And so more or less what that means is however hard you hit the brake in here, the trailer is going to match that. So if you're rolling up to a stoplight or something and you're, you know, maybe halfway on the brake, trailer's going to do the same thing. On the other hand, let's say if you know, you need to come to an emergency stop and you really got to stand on the brake pedal and slow things down, the trailer is going to match that pressure. There is a pretty cool feature that this offers. It's a park brake feature. And so, for example, let's say if you're at a stoplight or something, and you're on the brake for longer than 3 seconds, the brake controller is going to use or apply or let off the trailer brakes in an intelligent manner. So it's going to determine that, let's say, if you're parked downhill or something at a stoplight and the vehicle wants to roll forward, it's going to keep the brakes applied. If you're on flat ground, it's going to tell the trailer to let off the brakes, and because you don't need them, you don't need to apply them for no reason, right? So that's pretty cool. Kind of help prolong the life of your trailer brakes and all the other components that go along with that. And it's going to have a manual override feature as well. So what that means, when you push a button down, it's going to send power just back to the trailer brakes. And what that's going to do, you'd use that generally in the event of a sway. So, you know, you see it a lot with bigger campers and boxy trailers and things that kind of catch wind and on the highway kind of start to get and swaying around. You can apply, you know, just those brakes, kind of slow the trailer down and get it back riding and tracking correctly behind your Jeep. Other than that, at the end of the day, REDARC makes really good brake controllers. We do a lot of them here, and they all turn out nice. They're reliable, and don't get too many complaints about them, you know, so you can't really ask for too much more. As far as the installation goes on the Jeep, I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty involved, you know, a lot of wiring. There's some other parts that you need to make everything work correctly, and you know, be prepared to spend a little bit of time. Everything's pretty tight and whatnot, you know, and that's gonna kind of hold true for just about any brake controller to get them to work on the Jeep. If that's your primary concern, if you're gonna be installing this yourself and you're looking for something that is easier, there's a Kurt Echo. It's a wireless one, and that requires about half the amount of work and half the amount of parts and wiring and things. So that's an option for you too, if that's what you're really concerned with. But hopefully the video that we're going to give you and the information you can take something away from, and it'll make your installation a little bit easier on you. So why don't we go ahead and jump right into that. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the back of our Jeep, and first thing we need to do is get our 7-way connector plug hooked up. So you'll take the included bracket, and I just use the self-tapping screws to secure it to the bottom of our bumper beam. Just ran it right up in there. Pretty good spot for it. If you want to put it somewhere else, you know, it's entirely up to you. But with that done, we'll take all of our wires and push them through. Get that in there. Then you'll take a screw, come back, if I can manage to grab the hardware here, take a flat washer, a split lock washer, and a hex nut, and I'm going to get all 4 of these started, and then we can come back and snug them down. And then we're going to have a 4-way flat coming off one end. I'm going to cut that cap off, and this is going to get plugged into our existing 4-way flat wiring. So on our Jeep today, this is a Takancha kit. Works just fine. The other one, I believe, is a Kurt, will work as well. But what I'm going to do is take some dielectric grease. I just put some on the terminals. This will help protect it against corrosion and things like that. And this will just plug right in. Now we can start to hook up some of our wires. So you're going to have a blue one and a black one. There will also be a yellow one that I just taped up. This is for a reverse light signal, and majority of you out there aren't going to use this unless you want it. You know, you tie this into your reverse light circuit. But for our brake controller and all of our standard lights to work, you don't need to worry about that. So it comes pre-attached with these butt connectors, which work just fine. However, especially on a Jeep like this, I'm going to switch them out to these heat shrink types and seal up and offer a little more protection against corrosion. So just clip that off. I'm going to strip the insulation back a little bit. Put the butt connector on and crimp it down. So then you can take the bundle of duplex wiring and just drape it over, and we're going to hook up the ends of it. So with this, very carefully take a razor blade or a utility knife and just very carefully and lightly cut down the center of it. And we'll pull it back about like this. Cut this tag end off here. So that'll expose a black wire and a white wire. We'll get these stripped. And twisted. Black wire is going to go to the black wire coming out of our 7-way, and this is going to be the 12-volt auxiliary power. So crimp that down. And the white wire will go to the blue wire coming out of the 7-way. This will be our electric brake output. So with those hooked up, being that they're heat shrink, I'm going to come back with my heat source and seal up the ends. What I've done is just took some electrical tape and taped up our connections for a little extra protection. The 4-way flat I taped up, and then I just zip tied to hold the two together to make it semi-permanent. But with this all done, I'm actually just going to tape this whole bundle up here, and then we can work on our ground wire and get all this secured. So I got our wiring taped up and kind of just tucked up in there, going off to the side. Use your zip ties to secure it. Since this is kind of close to the muffler, I just put a sharp bend in this here to keep it away from the heat, and this is definitely adequate. Our white wire is going to have the pre-attached ring terminal on it. This is going to be a ground wire, and so I'm going to attach that to this bumper beam here using the self-tapping screw. You can take our duplex wire, this gray wire, and run this all the way to the front, up into the engine compartment. And I was actually able to push it through a hole in the frame and run it pretty much the entire length of it. And put a little piece of wire loom here on it, just so it's not rubbing up against the metal edge there on our frame where it goes into it. But I used a fish wire to help get this through, and I'll show you like in the middle of the frame just so we can have a better example, a little more space how it works. But wire's going to run through and can essentially just run the entire length of the vehicle inside of the frame. Here along the frame, every now and again through the openings you can kind of see bits of our wiring, and every now and again you're able to kind of grab it, and I secured it using a zip tie. So here's what I was talking about with the pull wire. So this is just a piece of tubing. You can use a coat hanger, something along those lines, but to help kind of guide the wire where you want it to go, it's once you get to about here, it's pretty much wide open, so it's real easy. But you take it and push it through the frame, and then you can, find another hole that you want it to come out of. You reach down in there, grab it. You can tape your duplex wiring to the end, and then when you pull on it, it's going to feed it all the way out and through. So that can help you kind of run that wire through the frame. But it just continues along. Reached in, was able to secure it there. And right here is where it comes out and goes up into the engine compartment. Again, I used a little piece of loom there just to keep it a little protected. And honestly, once you have it to this point, when you go up in the engine compartment, it's pretty wide open. You can just reach down and grab it, essentially. Now in the engine compartment, this is where our wiring comes up. And in this corner here, this is where I cut the rest of our sheathing off, that gray sheathing. And so the white wire is going to run inside. The black wire is going to run over towards the passenger side of the vehicle. We'll start with the white one. So there's actually a grommet. If you have a automatic transmission, there will be a grommet right there that you can just drill a hole through and push the white wire to the inside of our vehicle. Inside of the vehicle, our white wire is coming out through here, and we're not going to need all this length inside. We'll only need maybe about a foot or so like this. That way we can kind of connect it to our brake controller. But chances are good we are going to need this length of wire because we're probably going to run a little short with the black wire. So I'm just going to cut it out like that. And then this length, what I'm going to do is run it back up into the engine compartment and leave, about the same distance, about this much hanging from underneath the dash. And with this one, it's not a bad idea to just mark the ends so, we don't get confused on what wire's what. So on this one, I'll probably just put a piece of black tape or a dot or something on the end just to help us identify it and keep everything in order. Back in the engine compartment, that white wire, the extra one, comes back out through the grommet. And so it, as well as the black wire from our duplex cable, is going to run to the passenger side. And I just ran it through this plastic piece here. So there's some snaps on it you can kind of just push up on, and these things pull apart. and tuck the wiring in there. I did have to remove this, just a couple of 10mm nuts holding it on, and it lifts right off. And yeah, just continue to route it all the way across to the other side. Our wires are going to come down through here, run up this way, and get hooked up to our breakers. So really not a ton of great spots to put our breakers, because you want to ideally get them closer to the battery, the better. So I just took a piece of metal, a silver piece, put a slight bend in it, attached it right here using this factory bolt, and kind of just made a little mounting point for our breakers here. So I just drilled some holes in the bracket and bolted them down. So one of them will be a 40 amp breaker, which is this guy here, and then you're going to use a 20 amp breaker as well, which is this one here. So with that said, the black wire, okay, that comes from the back of our 7-way plug, the one that we routed all the way up here, that's going to run to our 40 amp breaker and get connected to the silver post, or the auxiliary post. So you can cut it to length, crimp on a small ring terminal, put it over the post, and tighten it down using a 3/8. The white wire that we ran up through here, the one that, like I said, I'd put a piece of tape on to keep track of it, that's going to get routed to our 20 amp breaker, which is this one here. Again, hooked up the same way, goes on the silver auxiliary post. On both the 40 and the 20, the gold posts, these, both of these are going to have wires running over to our positive battery. So we have, you know, small ring terminals crimped on, and run them over through here. Where on those ends I have crimped on the larger ring terminals. All right, and these are going to get hooked up to our positive battery post. I'm going to use this stud because it's empty right there. That's a 12mm you can pull off, but I'm not going to hook these up to power just yet. I want to have everything hooked up in terms of our brake controller and everything. That way we're not dealing with hot live wires when we're trying to figure everything else out. Now back inside of our Jeep, we can start to get everything hooked up. So I'm going to strip both of our wires back, crimp on the terminal, and this wire here, the white one that's running to the back of our vehicle to the 7-way, that's going to be the electric brake output. And then this one here that has the black tape that we ran to the breaker under the hood, that's going to be our brake controller power. So we're using the REDARC cable here. The blue one's going to be electric brake output, and the black one is going to get hooked up to our power. We can take the appropriate wires and get them hooked up to complete the connection. Our other two wires, white one's going to be ground, and this one's going to be our brake light signal, the red one is. But before we worry about hooking those up, I feel like we should figure out where to mount up everything. That way we know if we need to extend these wires or what. So I found a good spot, this center panel here. You can just grab the corners of it, pop it off, and behind here we'll be able to find a spot. What I did was use this factory brace here and use this bracket that I have laying around. So it's just an L bracket essentially. I pulled out an 8mm bolt that was originally in this brace and used it to secure my bracket. And this just essentially created a little shelf there that this will sit on, and eventually I'll run zip ties through the bracket and around our unit to actually keep it secure. So anywhere is pretty much fine. You just want to avoid zip tying this or sticking it to anything that's going to you know, bounce around or move around. You want this to be, you know, secure. So with that in mind, I took our connector plug here and just routed it up loosely into position. We're gonna plug this in before we zip tie this on and everything because it'll be a little bit easier. So that just plugs into one side of the unit. And on the other side, we can take the other cable. Kind of looks like a phone jack. You can use the 90-degree side or the straight side, doesn't really matter. We got enough space, I'm gonna use a straight one here. That will plug in, and then I'll probably just loosely secure this for now, or I might just, looks like we'll probably be in good shape. I'm gonna get our zip ties wrapped around it and get everything secured and locked down. I got our unit all zip tied up, and this is how it turned out, so pretty straightforward there. And then while I was at it, the white wire coming out of the connector plug that's plugged into our brake controller, like I said, that was the ground wire. And with that, I just crimped on a ring terminal, pulled out this factory bolt here using an 8mm socket, put the bolt through the ring terminal, and just tighten it back down. So all we have left is the red wire coming out of our brake controller adapter plug. And this needs to get connected to a brake light signal. So the signal, whenever you push the brake pedal down, it'll send power. Well, in these Jeeps, you're not supposed to tie into the factory wiring, whether the signal's there or not. In the past, you've had issues with throwing all kinds of things off, and so what I suggest doing is using a stoplight switch. It's an additional one that you can pick up. The one we're using is a Roadmaster. It's custom fit, so it bolts right up. That's where this wire is getting hooked to. On our stoplight switch, we'll have a couple wires that come out. One will go to power, the other one will get connected to this one here. So I already have that installed and everything. It's located just, if you follow our brake pedal arm up, just right up at the top of it. Here's a better look at our stoplight switch. So just kind of bear with us here because it's pretty tight up there, but essentially there's a bracket. You pull a bolt off, put the bracket on, and put that switch against the brake pedal arm. And you want that switch to have power almost as soon as you push that brake pedal arm down. Pretty straightforward. You know, you can always refer to some of our other videos here on this to have some better guidance on how exactly to get this piece installed. Back under the hood, now you can hook up all of your wires that you ran up here. So these two were for our brake controller install kit. This one was our brake light switch. And then this one was just for our existing 4-pole wiring that was already installed. So got all these back to power, remove that with a 12mm, slid them over the post, and tighten them back down. Find a spot to mount up our control knob. And on this vehicle, not a whole lot of options here. Looks like our best bet will be in this area, and it's still pretty tight. I was able to kind of remove a handful of the screws that run up through here, pull this out to take a look behind it, and it's doable, but it's gonna be kind of tight. Kind of our only option though. You can take this piece and use it as a kind of a template. So I put that on the dash and marked it out. And I'll come back with a 3/8 drill bit and drill the big one out first here. I'm going to use a 3/8 drill bit to create the hole there where we're going to mount up our switch knob that'll control the brake controller. The big one's drilled out. You can come back with an 1/8" drill bit and drill out the smaller one above it. And you want this hole to be in the 12 o'clock position. So the small hole pointed up at 12 o'clock there. Forgot to mention that. Once I got those holes drilled, I was able to mount up our dial. When I had this panel kind of pulled back, I was able to remove this. That way you could see in there and work. You can just squeeze down on these tabs from the inside and get your hand back up in there. Squeeze them down and then push that out. And you can unplug it if you want. You know, you just push up on the red thing and squeeze down on it. But it was tight, definitely a tight fit. You put your dial through the back side, and then on the front side, you know, it'll poke through the hole. you can put that gray ring around it and then take the nut and run that in there and tighten it down. You don't have to crank down on it, you know, just get it about as tight as you can by hand. If you want, you can take a socket and kind of bump it a little bit too. But then turn the dial all the way to the left, and the part that has a little piece that shoots up, and take your knob and line the 0 up with that. Just push it right into place, and you know, you're able to adjust it and everything. But so in here, inside, the cable just plugs right into it. It's almost like an Ethernet cable. You know, you really can't mess it up. I use the side that has a straight end. The other end of it, the cable just plugs into our brake controller. There's a piece of plastic that kind of ran through there. I did just kind of cut that out of the way and just give us a little bit more space. That's how I did it. And be patient with this part. Take your time. You know, don't just start cutting and going crazy here. Think things through. If I had to do this again, I would probably mount this maybe like 1 knob's worth over, about where my finger is. And that's just because there's a little bit more space behind there. So it's kind of hard to judge, but you know, if I was you and you're going through this, I would probably put it right about there. So maybe, you know, maybe the edge of the knob, where the edge of my thumb is, would probably be a little bit better. Just have a little bit more space. But this did work out. And I'll go ahead and pop our switching back in. That just plugs right in. And I'll snap it back into place, and then we can test everything. So I'm just going to hook up to my test box and simply just push down the manual override button. I'm just going to turn our knob up to 10. Push down on that, and when I do that, we should be getting power at our tester box. Now we verified it is working, at least our manual override. What you want to do is calibrate the brake controller. So right now we have it flashing from green to blue. All you have to do is go out and drive around like you normally would, and after a series of stops, it'll learn its positioning and everything and turn to a solid blue color. You don't even have to have a trailer hooked up. You can just drive around like you normally would, and it usually don't take very long. Only a few minutes usually. If you do have your trailer hooked up or anything like that, it'll kind of speed that process up. But either way, drive around. Eventually this will turn to a solid blue, and once that has happened, you know everything is calibrated. But with that said, that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the REDARC Liberty trailer brake controller on our 2022 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited.